A certain work is to be done in your soul. Being lent a hand won't open the door. A certain work is to be done in your soul. Being lent a hand won't open the door. A spring that is right there in your house is better than a stream flowing in from outside. How fine is the channel to the source of things. It will free you from these other water channels. You draw sweet water from 100 springs, but when they fail, so does your pleasure. When the celestial spring is flowing in you, you won't need to take water from other springs. If you take pleasure only in water and mud, your heart's wages will be sorrow and pain. Water flowing to a fortress from outside is plentiful in times of security and peace. But when the enemy is circling that fort, intent on the massacre of its inhabitants, their army will cut off the water supply to overcome the refuge of that fortress. At that time, even a brackish spring inside is better than 100 great rivers outside. Our lifelines, cutters, and the armies of death arrive like autumn to sever the twigs and leaves. No one is aided then by the season of spring except by God's face in the soul's springtime. Okay? So in Rumi's original, here we are. This is from book 6, and it is starting at line 3596. کاری ز درون جان تو می باید که از آریه ها تو را دری نگشاید. یک چشمه آب از درون خانه به زانجویی که آن ز بیرون آید. حبذا کار ز اصل چیزها فارغت آرد از این کاریزها. تو ز صد ینبوع شربت میکشی، هر چه زان صد کم شود کاهد خوشی. چون بجوشید از درون چشمه سنی، ز استراق چشمه های گردی غنی. قرة العینت چو زاب و گل بود، راتبه این قره درد دل بود. قلعه را چون آب آید از بیرون، در زمان امن باشد برفزون. چون که دشمن گرد آن حلقه کند، تا که اندر خونشان غرقه کند. آب بیرون را ببرند آن صحبا، تا نباشد قلعه را زنها پناه. آن زمان یک چاه شوری از درون، به سجیهون شیرین از بیرون قاطع الاسباب و لشکرهای مرگ همچوده آید به قطع شاق و برگ در جهان نبود مددشان از بهار جز مگر در جان بهار روی یار. Okay? So, again, think about what we were talking about earlier and what Rumi is saying. In many of his poems, he's using the symbol of water. He's talking about, in another poem, if you look deeply into the pool of your soul, there's a spring, and that spring, he says, has a channel to the ocean. So not only is there a well and a spring, but in those other poems, he said it actually has a channel to the ocean. So you always have an escape to infinity, because the question was about infinity. In this one, he's explaining your relationship to a certain work is to be done in your soul. Being lent a hand won't open the door. A spring that is right there in your house is better than a stream flowing in from outside. How fine is the channel to the source of things. It will free you from these other water channels. You draw sweet water from 100 springs, but when they fail, so does your pleasure. When the celestial spring is flowing in you, you won't need to take water from other springs. If you take pleasure in water and mud, your heart's wages will be sorrow and pain. Water flowing to a fortress from outside is plentiful in times of security and peace, but when the enemy is circling that fort, intent on the massacre of its inhabitants, their army will cut off the water supply to overcome the refuge of that fortress. At that time, even a brackish spring inside is better than 100 great rivers outside. Our lifeline's cutters and the armies of death arrive like autumn to sever the twigs and leaves. No one is aided then by the season of spring, except by God's face in the soul's springtime. Now, incidentally, Rumi does not imagine that this is happening anywhere except in one person. The imagery is elaborate, huh? There's armies, but for Rumi, he's talking about the channels. But Rumi, in the commentaries and in material near this poem, is very clear that he's talking about channels of perception and intention and desire, diverse channels that are not the channel that is inside your fortress. So there's this idea now of a fortress, and how in peacetime, let's say you were at peace with yourself, there's no problem, there's water everywhere. Let's say do you not sometimes feel in great harmony for no particular reason, at other times you feel out of harmony, huh?
Yeah.
And at times you know perfectly well why you're not in harmony with yourself, but other times we don't really know. But this is what he's talking about. He's saying that you, in particular, you are relying upon channels that are not coming from your own source. He's talking to himself, and he's asking you to talk to yourself. He's saying, I am relying upon my own happiness coming from out there, and I should be relying upon it from coming from in here. It will have to do with what is out there, but I should discover this spring. Just like I said, it's often a spring, a cheshma. And in Arabic it would be an ayn, wouldn't it? Isn't that true?
Yeah.
So What do they have in common? Cheshman and Ain, are they what is word, as vocabulary? Of course, I shouldn't expect you to know too much about the Persian, but the Arabic, what does Ain mean?
Eye.
It means the eye, it means the perception.
And Cheshma is eye too. Cheshma.
Correct. See, so the Persian and the Arabic are in same understanding about this, you see. And we are in a similar understanding when we talk about the fons vitae. What's the fons vitae?
The spring of life.
Yeah, the fountain of life. And people understand that the fountain represents the place that purity and life is emerging from. So the ayn also in Arabic means essence. So we have three meanings, don't we? The most essential thing, the fountain, and their identity with the perceptions. Okay? So therefore there's an essential source of awareness that is perceptive and alive, essentially is what it means. And that's why he's using this imagery so much. So the nature of infinity, if you're trying to visualize out, what would that mean? Does it not just emerge in another universe, or is it infinite entirely? So how do you want to think about that? But at the very least, you can understand that in Sufi thought, it is moving in two directions, and the best place you can see that is in yourself. Most human beings can never see it in themselves because they only see relative good and lesser or greater evil. So in the domain of darkness, to talk about infinite darkness and infinite light, you're at a bit of a disadvantage. If you were, on the other hand, living in the domain of light, you would be at a bit of disadvantage in talking about the infinity or the nature of darkness. Agreed? And that's why the human being is regarded as being exactly between darkness and light. Coming back to the Quranic verse that I was citing, Inna aradna al-amanata ala samawati wal-ardi wal-jibali fa'abayna an yahmilnaha wa ashfaqna minha. Sahih International says, indeed we offered the trust. So here it's called a trust. So we understand again, it's this wonderful word that is directly, linguistically connected to the word belief. It's no surprise, therefore, that the Sufis take the literal interpretation that the human being is indeed ignorant and cruel, basically. And those words in Arabic also can be interpreted to mean that the Sufi has the ability to become ignorant of the lower self, to self-transcend, to rise above oneself, to become ignorant of to be ignorant of one's own ignorance in a positive way, because most people are actually ignorant of their own ignorance. I'm talking here in a good sense. And to become rigorous and harsh with what is false in oneself. So, in this sense, we have the idea of zulm, meaning cruelty. This is not a case of neurotic self-loathing. It has nothing to do with that. This has to do with looking in the mirror honestly at oneself and asking what is real, what is true. But the other thing is the Sufis, like Ibn Arabi, they say when God says zaluman in this verse, he's actually not talking about cruelty. The root he's taking it from is zulmat, which means the darkness. You see? You can read for yourself, many of the Sufis. So you see, you understand it could either be zulm, which means cruelty, or it could be zulmat, which means the darkness. And he's saying that to go into this darkness it has a negative side. If you were nihilistic, it would be rather negative, wouldn't it? But have you not been out in a dark night after you've gotten over the fear of goblins and felt how magically and majestically peaceful it is, you see, where you grow out of the fear of the darkness and you learn that the darkness is the place of infinity, isn't it? Just like light is the place of infinity. Well, that's all we get tonight on this topic of infinity, but does it help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Think about, would you agree that most religions, they impose a responsibility? It implies that you have more responsibility than you thought you had. Agreed? Yeah. And most people today might not be aware of that. Would you agree? And in fact, all through history, they were not necessarily aware that they have a responsibility they were unaware of. And maybe they have a little coin in their pocket that has a picture of the king on it, and this is called conscience. And even that penny tells them that there's something of value that they're not quite taking note of. See, so this verse is an example of all of these traditions saying you come from a great domain, you come from a great infinite place. How sad that you have fallen into this trap. You see, so much of philosophical and especially religious and mystical literature is about the fall of Adam. Agreed?
Yeah.
And so we can look at it, what's interesting about the verse, we can look at it linguistically, we can look at it philosophically, but certainly religiously from any point of view of any tradition. And what's fascinating about it is that the word being used is the amanat. See? So again, why is that important to the conversation? It's because words like the faithful or the believer, they in fact don't have such a flimsy meaning whatsoever. They have a much more profound meaning that I was implying by quoting the preamble to the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now wait a minute, why would that need to be true?
Declaration of Independence.
Yes, sorry. The Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, after editing, this is what we have, okay? How could all people be equal? There are different heights, different color, different capacity, but there must be some level where it is held to be the truth. Agreed? Doesn't it ask more than belief from you? Doesn't it ask you to look and see if that might not be true? And the assumption is that you would have the conscience and the consciousness to see that that is true. And the only way you could have that consciousness is because you are also made of intimacy. Heedlessness, selfishness, intimacy, us, everything together made familiar, God says in Quran, for example, through the word ulfat, drawn together into intimacy, intimately expanding without any limitation forever and ever in further intimacy, versus a spiral of lonely darkness and loss of one's own nature, making the loss all the more tragic, you see. Described in the Quran in some places, having become less than cattle, for example, okay? So this verse is the most clear example in the whole Quran of this concept, that a trust was offered. It was offered to all creatures who did not have the quality of interface. The atmospheres they live in they're either too close to the world of darkness or too close to the world of light. The earth and the heavens. The mountains rush up in between, as the Sufis say, and they account for the imaginal worlds. None of those domains are in a balance between the infinity of infinite narrowing and infinite expanding. Okay, that's the notion. It sounds philosophical, but it's an invitation to say, look, if you do these practices, if you take worship seriously, or even if you just take psychological principle of meditation seriously, you may actually run into this trust that was bestowed. And when you do, you will see that it is infinite. And you will realize that you cannot own it, but that you can participate in it, you see? So that's what's beautiful about it, you see, about the doctrine of the infinity project and the question about the infinite progression. Interface of infinite expansion or infinite narrowing. And the language is about the earth, meaning Nasut, or the heavens, which is the world of light, or the mountains. So these are the three things it was offered to that turned it down, and they were scared, it said. They refused. They said, we are scared of this, we will not take it. Then almost comically, God says, but the human being accepted it because the human being is ignorant and cruel. It seems like a very strange statement, does it not? So the very verse of the Quran, it begs you to think about it. Did God mean it literally? Well, you would have to start there. I take it literally, that unless you have ignorance, you have less capacity to understand knowledge. The human being, the nature of things are comparative entities. We can only understand things in context and in comparisons, you see. So I take it very, very literally. And on the other hand, I look at the obvious symbolism in it, because it begs the question. I mean, it really is not possible. It just ends right there. Nor does the next verse illuminate it. So you have to assume the whole thing is in that verse and that there's a deeper meaning. Okay? And it's built around this word that's used to mean your actual religious faith, because it's directly connected. So this whole idea of the trust or of security. Don't you give something in trust because of security? It will be taken care of. It will be preserved. Agreed? For the human being, it is preserved in the form of being like a branded animal. It is branded upon our soul. So of course it's preserved whether we like it or not. Most humans being completely unaware of what is branded there. You follow? So that's the notion of it.